Section 18, Letters 85 to 90. Letter the 85th. The Marquise de Merteuil to the Vicomte de Valmont.
At last you may be tranquil, and above all you can render me justice. Listen, and do not confound me again with other women. I have brought my adventure with Prévan to a close. To a close. Do you fully understand what that implies? Now you shall judge whether it is I or he who can vaunt himself. The story will not be as amusing as the adventure, neither would it be just that you, who have done no more than reason ill or well about the affair, should reap as much pleasure from it as I, who have given my time and labour. In the meantime, if you have some great scheme to try, if you would attempt some enterprise in which this dangerous rival should seem to you to be feared, this is your time. He leaves the field free to you, at least for some time. Perhaps even he will never recover from the blow I have given him. How fortunate you are to have me for a friend! I am a benevolent fairy to you. You languish afar from the beauty who engrosses you. I say one word, and you find yourself once more at her side. You wish to revenge yourself on a woman who injures you. I point out to you the place where you have to strike, and abandon her to your tender mercies. Finally, to drive a formidable competitor from the lists, it is once more I whom you invoke, and I give heed to you. Truly, if you do not spend your life in thanking me, it means that you are an ingrate. I return to my adventure, and take it up from the beginning. The rendezvous made so loudly on leaving the opera was understood as I had hoped. Prévan repaired to it, and when the Maréchale said to him politely that she congratulated herself on seeing him twice in succession at her days, he was careful to reply that, since Tuesday night, he had cancelled 1,000 engagements in order that he might thus dispose of that evening. Bon entendeur, salut! As I wished, however, to know with more certainty whether I was or was not the veritable object of this flattering zeal, I resolved to compel the new aspirant to choose between me and his dominant passion. I declared that I should not play, and he, on his side, found 1,000 pretexts for not playing, and my first triumph was over Lansquenet. I secured the Bishop of for my gossip. I chose him because of his intimacy with the hero of the day, to whom I wished to give every facility to approach me. I was contented also to have a respectable witness, who could, at need, depose to my behaviour and my language. This arrangement was successful. After the vague and customary remarks, Prévan, having soon made himself the leader of the conversation, tried different tones in turn, in order to discover which was likely to please me. I refused that of sentiment, as though I had no faith in it. I stopped, by my seriousness, his gaiety, which seemed to me too frivolous for a début. He fell back upon delicate friendship, and it was beneath this well-worn flag that we began our reciprocal attack. At supper-time the bishop did not descend. Prévan then gave me his hand, and was naturally placed by my side at table. One must be just. He maintained with much skill our private conversation, while seeming only to be occupied with the general conversation, to which he had the air of being the largest contributor. At dessert they spoke of a new piece which was to be given on the following Monday at the Freinet. I expressed some regret that I had not my box. He offered me his own, which at first, as is the usage, I refused, to which he answered humorously enough that I did not understand him, that certainly he would not make the sacrifice of his box to any one whom he did not know, but that he only let me know it was at Madame la Maréchale's disposal. She lent herself to this pleasantry, and I accepted. On our return to the salon, he asked, as you may well believe, for a place in this box, and when the Maréchale, who treats him with great kindness, promised him it, if he were good, he made it the occasion of one of those double-edged conversations at which you have extolled his talent to me. Indeed, having fallen on his knees like a submissive child, he said, under pretext of begging for her counsel and tasking her opinion, he uttered many a flattering and tender thing, the application of which I could easily take to myself. Several persons having not returned to play after supper, the conversation was much more general and less interesting, but our eyes spoke much. I say our eyes, I should have said his, for mine spoke but one language, that of surprise. He must have thought I was astonished, and quite absorbed in the prodigious effect which he had on me. I think I left him highly satisfied. I was no less pleased myself. On the following Monday I was at the Franais, as we had agreed. In spite of your literary curiosity, I can tell you nothing of the performance, except that Prévan has a marvellous talent for cajolery, and that the piece failed. That is all that I learned. I was sorry to see the evening come to an end. It had really pleased me mightily, and in order to prolong it, I invited the Maréchale to come and sup with me. This gave me a pretext for proposing it to the amiable flatterer, who only asked the time to hasten to the Comtesses de P, and free himself from an engagement.
Note. See letter the 70th.
This name brought back all my anger. I saw plainly that he was going to begin his confidences. I remembered your wise counsels, and promised myself to proceed with the adventure. I was certain that I should cure him of this dangerous indiscretion. Being new to my company, which was not very numerous that evening, he owed me the customary usages. Thus, when we went to supper, he offered me his hand. I was malicious enough, when accepting it, to allow mine to tremble slightly, and to walk with my eyes cast down, and a quick respiration. I had the air of having a presentiment of my defeat, and of being afraid of my victor. He noticed it readily. Then the traitor promptly changed his tone and aspect. He had been gallant, he became tender. It was not that his language did not remain much the same, circumstances compelled that, but his gaze had become less keen and more caressing, the inflection of his voice softer, his smile was no longer the smile of finesse, but of satisfaction. Finally, in his conversation, suppressing more and more the fire of his sallies, wit gave place to delicacy. I ask you, could you have done better yourself? On my side, I grew pensive to such a point that the company was forced to perceive it, and when I was reproached for it, I was clever enough to defend myself indifferently, and to cast on Prévan a rapid, yet shy and embarrassed glance, that was to make him believe that all my fear was lest he should divine the cause of my trouble. After supper, I profited by the moment when the good Maréchale was telling one of those stories which he is always telling, to settle myself on my ottoman, in that languorous condition which is induced by tender rêverie. I was not sorry for Prévan to see me thus. In truth, he honoured me with most particular attention. You may well imagine that my timid glances did not dare to seek the eyes of my conqueror, but directed towards him in a more humble fashion, they soon informed me that I was obtaining the effect which I sought to produce. I still needed to persuade him that I shared it, so that, when the Maréchale announced she was going to retire, I cried out in a faint and tender voice, "Adieu! I was so comfortable here." I rose, however, but before taking leave of her, I asked her plans, in order to have a pretext for telling her mine, and of letting her know that I should stay at home the whole of the following day. Upon this we all separated. I then started reflecting. I had no doubt but that Prévan would profit by the sort of rendezvous I had given him, that he would come early enough to find me alone, and that the attack would be a fierce one. But I was quite sure also that, owing to my reputation, he would not treat me with that lightness which is only employed with women of occasion, or with those who have no experience, and I foresaw a certain success if he pronounced the word love above all, if he had the pretension of obtaining it from me. How convenient it is to have dealings with you people of principles! Sometimes a clumsy lover disconcerts us by his bashfulness, or embarrasses us with his fiery transports. It is a fever which, like the other, has its chills and ardours, and sometimes varies in its symptoms. But the even tenor of your way is so easily divined. The arrival, the aspect, the tone, the language, I knew it all the day before. I will not report our conversation to you then, you will easily supply it for yourself. Only remark that, in my feigned defence, I aided him with all my power, embarrassment, to give him time to speak, sorry reasons that he might combat them, distrust and fear to revive his protestations, and that perpetual refrain on his side of "I asked you only for a word," and the silence on mine, which seemed but to delay him in order to make him desire the more. During all that, a hand seized 100 times, a hand always withdrawn, yet never refused. One might pass a whole day thus. We passed a mortal hour. We should be there, perhaps, still, if we had not heard a carriage entering my courtyard. This fortunate occurrence naturally rendered his entreaties livelier, and I, seeing the moment arrive when I was out of danger of any surprise, prepared myself by a long sigh, and granted him the precious word. The visitor was announced, and soon afterwards I was surrounded by a numerous circle. Prévan begged to be allowed to come on the following morning, and I consented, but, careful to defend myself, I ordered my waiting-maid to remain all through the time of this visit in my bed-chamber, whence, you know, one can see all that passes in my dressing-room, and it was there that I received him. Free in our conversation, and having both the same desire, we were soon in agreement, but it was necessary to get rid of this inopportune spectator. It was for that I was waiting. Then, painting an imaginative picture of my home life, I persuaded him without difficulty that we should never find a moment's liberty, and that he must consider as a sort of miracle that which we had enjoyed yesterday, and even that contained too great a risk for me to expose myself to, since at any moment some one might enter my salon. I did not fail to add that all these usages were established, because until that day they had never interfered with me, and I insisted at the same time upon the impossibility of changing them without compromising myself in the eyes of my household. He attempted sadness, assumed ill-humour, told me that I had little love, and you can guess how much all that touched me. But, wishing to strike the decisive blow, I summoned tears to my aid. It was precisely the Zaor, "You are weeping." The empire which he had thought to have gained over me, and the hope he had conceived of compassing my ruin at his will, stood him in good stead for all the love of Orosmane. This dramatic scene accomplished, we returned to our arrangements. The day being out of the question, we turned our attention to the night, but my Swiss became an insurmountable obstacle, and I would not permit any attempt to bribe him. He suggested the wicket gate of my garden, but this I had foreseen, and I invented a dog who, although calm and silent enough by day, became a real demon at night. The ease with which I entered into all these details was well fitted to embolden him. Thus he went on to propose the most ridiculous expedients to me, and it was this which I accepted. To begin with, his servant was as trusty as himself. In this he did not lie to me, the one was quite as little so as the other. I was to give a great supper at my house. He was to be there, and was to select a moment when he could leave alone. The cunning confidant would call his carriage, open the door, whilst he, Prévan, would slip adroitly on one side. In no way could his coachman perceive this, so that, whilst everybody believed him to have left, he had really remained with me. The question remained whether he could reach my apartment. I confess that at first I had some difficulty in finding reasons against this project weak enough for him to be able to destroy. He answered me with instances. To hear him, nothing was more ordinary than this method. He himself had often employed it. It was even that one which he used the most, as being the least dangerous. Subjugated by these irrefutable authorities, I admitted with candour that I had a private staircase which led to the near neighbourhood of my boudoir, that I could leave the key of it, and it was possible for him to shut himself in there and wait, without undue risk, until my women had retired, and then, to give more probability to my consent, the moment after I was unwilling. I only relented on the condition of a perfect docility, of a propriety, a propriety. In short, I was quite willing to prove my love to him, but not so much to gratify his own. The exit of which I was forgetting to tell you was to be made by the wicket gate of my garden. It was only a matter of waiting for daybreak, when the Cerberus would not utter a sound. Not a soul passes at that hour, and people are in the soundest slumber. If you are astonished at this heap of sorry reasons, it is because you forget our reciprocal situation. What need had we of better ones? He asked nothing better than for the thing to be known, and as for me, I was quite certain that it should not be known. The next day but one was the day fixed. You will notice that there is the affair settled, and that no one has yet seen Prévan in my society. I meet him at supper at the house of one of my friends. He offers her his box for a new piece, and I accept a place in it. I invite this woman to supper, during the piece and before Prévan. I can hardly avoid inviting him to be of the party. He accepts, and pays me 2 days later the visit exacted by custom. 'Tis true, he comes to see me on the morning of the next day, but besides the fact that morning visits no longer count, it only rests with me to find this one too free, and in fact I put him in the category of persons less intimate with me, by a written invitation to a supper of ceremony. I can well cry with Annette, "Albeit that is all." The fatal day having come, the day on which I was to lose my virtue and my reputation, I gave my instructions to the faithful Victoire, and she executed them as you will presently see. In the meantime evening arrived. I had already a great company with me when Prévan was announced. I received him with a marked politeness, which testified to the slightness of my acquaintance with him. and I put him by the side of the Maréchal, as being the person through whom I had made it. The evening produced nothing but a very short note, which the discreet lover found a means of giving me, and which, according to my custom, I burned. It informed me that I could trust him, and this essential word was surrounded by all the parasitical words, such as love, happiness, etc., which never fail to appear at such a festival. By midnight, the rubbers being over, I proposed a short medley.
Note: some persons may not, perhaps, be aware that a medley, Macédoine, is a succession of sundry different games of chance, amongst which each player has a right to choose when it is his turn to deal. It is one of the inventions of the century.
I had the double design of favouring Prévent's escape, and, at the same time, of causing it to be noticed. That could not fail to happen, considering his reputation as a gamester. I was not sorry, either, that it might be remembered, if need were, that I had not been in a hurry to be left alone. The game lasted longer than I had thought. The devil tempted me, and I was succumbing to my desire to console the impatient prisoner. I was thus rushing on to my ruin, when I reflected that, once having quite surrendered, I should not have sufficient control over him to keep him in the costume of decency which my plans required. I had the strength to resist. I retraced my steps, and returned, not without some ill-humour, to resume my place at the eternal game. It finished, however, and every one left. As for me, I rang for my women, undressed very rapidly, and sent them also away. Can you see me, Vicomte, in my light toilette, walking with timid and circumspect steps to open the door to my conqueror? He saw me. Lightning is not more prompt. What shall I say to you? I was vanquished, quite vanquished, before I could say one word to arrest him or defend myself. He then wanted to take a convenient position, and one more suitable to the circumstances. He cursed his finery, which, he said, kept him aloof from me. He would combat me with equal arms, but my extreme timidity was opposed to this project, and my soft caresses did not leave him time. He was occupied with other things. His rights were redoubled, his pretensions were renewed, but then— "Listen to me," I said. "You will have thus far a merry story enough to tell the two Comtesses de P., and 1,000 others, but I am curious to know how you will relate the end of the adventure." Speaking thus, I rang the bell with all my strength. For the nonce it was my turn, and my action was quicker than my speech. He had only stammered out something, when I heard Victoire running up and calling the servants, whom she had kept near, as I had ordered. Then, assuming my queenly tone, raising my voice, "Leave me, monsieur," I went on, "and never come into my presence again." Whereupon a crowd of my people entered. Poor Prévent lost his head, and, fancying an ambush in what was at bottom no more than a joke, he betook himself to his sword. It did him no good, for my valet de chambre, who is brave and active, caught him round the body and hurled him to the ground. I was in a mortal fright, I vow. I cried them to cease, and bade them let his retreat go unmolested, as long as they made certain that he was gone. My men obeyed me, but there was great commotion amongst them. They were indignant that any one should have dared to fail in respect towards their virtuous mistress. They all accompanied the unfortunate chevalier, noisily and with the scandal which I desired. Victoire only stayed behind, and we occupied ourselves during this interval in repairing the disorder of my bed. My household returned in the same state of commotion. and I, still upset by my emotion, asked them by what lucky chance they happened to be not yet gone to bed. Victoire then related to me how she had asked 2 women friends to supper, how they had sat up with her, and, in short, all that we had together agreed upon. I thanked them all and let them retire, bidding one of them, however, to go immediately and summon my physician. It seemed to me that I was justified in fearing ill effects from my mortal fright, and it was a sure means of giving wind and celebrity to the news. He came, in effect, condoled with me mightily, and prescribed repose. In addition, I bade Victoire go abroad early in the morning and gossip in the neighbourhood. Everything succeeded so well that, before noon, and as soon as I was awake, my pious neighbour was already at my bedside, to know the truth and the details of this terrible adventure. I was obliged to moan with her for an hour over the corruption of the age. A moment later I received from the Maréchal the note which I enclose. Finally, about 5 o'clock, to my great astonishment, Monsieur arrived.
Note: the commanding officer of the regiment to which Prévan belonged.
He came, he told me, to bring his excuses that an officer of his regiment should have been so grossly wanting in respect. He had only heard of it at dinner at the Maréchal's, and had immediately sent word to Prévan to consider himself under arrest. I asked for his pardon, and he refused it me. I then thought that, as an accomplice, I ought to dispatch myself on my side, and at least keep myself under strict guard. I caused my door to be shut, and word to be given that I was indisposed. "'Tis to my solitude that you owe this long letter. I shall write one to Madame de Volanges, which she will be sure to read aloud, and from which you will hear the story as it is to be told. I forgot to tell you that Belleroche is enraged and absolutely wants to fight Prévan. The poor fellow! Luckily I shall have time to calm his head. In the meantime I am going to repose my own, which is tired with writing. Adieu, Vicomte. Paris, 25th of September, 17...
Letter the 86th. The Maréchal de to the Marquise de Merteuil. A note enclosed in the preceding one.
Ah, heavens! What do I hear, my dear madame? Is it possible that little Prévost should commit such abominations? And to you above all? What is one not exposed to? One is no longer safe in one's own house. Truly such events console one for being old. But that for which I shall never console myself is that I have been partly the cause of your receiving such a monster at your house. I promise you that, if what I am told is true, he shall never more set foot within my doors. That is the course which all nice persons will adopt towards him, if they do their duty. I am told that you have been quite ill, and I am anxious about your health. Give me, I pray you, your precious news, or send by one of your women, if you cannot come yourself. I only ask a word to reassure me. I should have hastened to you this morning, had it not been for my baths, which my doctor will not allow me to interrupt, and I must go to Versailles this afternoon, always on my nephew's business. Adieu, dear madame. Count upon my sincere friendship for life. Paris, September 25th, 17.
Letter the 87th. The Marquise de Merteuil to Madame de Volanges.
I write to you from my bed, my dear, kind friend. The most disagreeable event, and the most impossible to have foreseen, has made me ill with fright and annoyance. It is assuredly not because I have aught to reproach myself with, but it is always so painful for virtuous woman, who retains the modesty which becomes her sex, to have public attention drawn upon her, that I would give anything in the world to have been able to avoid this unhappy adventure, and I am still uncertain whether I may not decide to go to the country and wait until it be forgotten. This is the affair I allude to. I met at the Maréchal a certain Monsieur de Prévent, whom you are sure to know by name, and whom I knew in no other way. But meeting him at such a house, I was, it seems to me, quite justified in believing him to be of good society. He is well enough made personally, and seemed to me not lacking in wit. Chance and the tedium of play left me the only woman alone with him and the Bishop of... the rest of the company being occupied with Lansquenet. The three of us conversed together till supper-time. At the table, a new piece, of which there was some talk, gave him the occasion to offer his box to the Maréchal, who accepted it, and it was arranged that I should have a place in it. It was for Monday last at the Français. As the Maréchal was coming to sup with me at the close of the performance, I proposed to this gentleman to accompany her, and he came. 2 days later he paid me a visit which passed with the customary compliments, and without the occurrence of anything marked. On the following day he came to see me in the morning, and this appeared to me a trifle bold, but I thought that instead of making him feel this by my fashion of receiving him, it were better to remind him, by a politeness, that we were not yet on so intimate a footing as he seemed to imply. To this end I sent him that same day a very dry and very ceremonious invitation for a supper that I was giving the day before yesterday. I did not speak 4 words to him all the evening, and he, on his side, retired as soon as his game was finished. You will admit that thus far nothing has less the air of leading up to an adventure. After the other games we played a medley which lasted till nearly 2 o'clock, and finally I went to bed. It must have been a mortal half-hour at least after my women had retired, when I heard a noise in my room. I opened my curtains with much alarm, and saw a man enter by the door which leads into my boudoir. I uttered a piercing cry, and I recognized by the light of my night-light this Monsieur de Prévent, who, with inconceivable effrontery, told me not to alarm myself, that he would enlighten me as to the mystery of his conduct, and that he begged me not to make any noise. Thus speaking, he lit a candle. I was so confounded that I could not speak. His tranquil and assured air petrified me, I think, even more. But he had not said 2 words when I saw what this pretended mystery was, and my only reply, as you will believe, was to clutch my bell-rope. By an incredible piece of good fortune all my household had been sitting up with one of my women, and were not yet in bed. My chambermaid, who, on coming to me, heard me speaking with much heat, was alarmed, and summoned all this company. You can imagine what a scandal! My people were furious. There was a moment when I thought my valet de chambre would kill Prévent. I confess that at the moment I was quite relieved to find myself in force. On reflection to-day, I should have found it preferable if only my chambermaid had come. She would have sufficed, and I should, perhaps, have escaped all this noise which afflicts me. In place of that, the tumult awoke the neighbours, the household talked, and it is the gossip of all Paris since yesterday. Monsieur de Prévent is in prison by order of the commanding officer of his regiment, who had the courtesy to call upon me to offer me his excuses, he said. This arrest will still further augment the noise, but I could not obtain that it should be otherwise. The town and the court have been to inscribe their names at my door, which I have closed to every one. The few persons I have seen tell me that justice is rendered me, and that public indignation against Prévent is at its height. Assuredly he well merits it, but that does not distract from the disagreeables of his adventure. Moreover, the man has certainly some friends, and his friends are bound to be mischievous. Who knows? Who can tell what they will invent to my injury? Ah, Lord, how unfortunate to be a young woman! She has done nothing yet when she has put herself out of the reach of slander. She has need even to give the lie to calumny. Write me, I beg of you, what you would have done, what you would do in my place, in short, all your thought. It is always from you that I receive the sweetest consolation and the most prudent counsel. It is from you also that I love best to receive it. Adieu, my dear and kind friend. You know the sentiments which for ever attach me to you. I embrace your amiable daughter. Paris, 26th September, 17...
Letter the 88th. Cécile Volanges to the Vicomte de Valmont.
In spite of all the pleasure that I take, monsieur, in the letters of Monsieur le Chevalier d'Ancenis, and although I am no less desirous than he is that we might be able to see one another again without hindrance, I have not, however, dared to do what you suggest to me. In the first place, it is too dangerous. The ski, which you want me to put in the other's place, is like enough to it, in truth, but not so much so, however, that the difference is not to be seen, and mamma looks at and takes notice of everything. Again, although it has not yet been made use of since we have been here, there needs but a mischance, and if it was to be perceived, I should be lost for ever. And then, it seems to me, too, that it would be very wrong. To make a duplicate key like that, it is very strong. It is true that it is you who would be kind enough to undertake it, but in spite of that, if it became known, I should, none the less, have to bear the blame and the odium, since it would be for me that you had done it. Lastly, I have twice tried to take it, and certainly it would be easy enough if it were anything else, but I do not know why I always started trembling, and have never had the courage. I think, then, we had better stay as we are. If you continue to have the kindness to be as complaisant as hitherto, you will easily find a means of giving me a letter. Even with the last, but for the ill chance which made you suddenly turn round at a certain moment, we should have been quite secure. I can quite feel that you cannot, like myself, be thinking only of that, but I would rather have more patience and not risk so much. I am sure that Monsieur d'Ancenis would speak as I do, for every time that he wanted something which caused me too much pain, he always consented that it should not be. I will give you back, monsieur, at the same time as this letter, your own, that of Monsieur d'Ancenis, and your key. I am none the less grateful for all your kindnesses, and I beseech you to continue them. It is very true that I am most unhappy, and without you I should be even more so, but after all, she is my mother. I must needs have patience, and provided that Monsieur d'Ancenis goes on loving me, and you do not abandon me, perhaps a happier time will come. I have the honour to be, monsieur, with much gratitude, your most humble and obedient servant. At the Château de 26th of September, 17.
Letter the 89th. The Vicomte de Valmont to the Chevalier d'Ancenis.
If your affairs do not always advance as quickly as you could wish, my friend, it is not entirely me whom you must blame. I have more than one obstacle to overcome here. The vigilance and severity of Madame de Volanges are not the only ones. Your young friend also throws some in my way. Whether from coldness or timidity, she does not always do as I advise her, and I think none the less that I know better than she what must be done. I had found a sure and simple means of giving her your letters, and even of facilitating subsequently the interviews which you desire, but I could not persuade her to employ it. I am all the more distressed at this, as I cannot see any other means of bringing you together. And as, even with your correspondence, I am constantly afraid of compromising us all three. Now you may imagine that I am no more anxious to run that risk myself than to expose either of you to it. I should be truly grieved, however, if your little friend's lack of confidence were to prevent me from being useful to you. Perhaps you would do well to write to her on the subject. Consider what you want to do. It is for you alone to decide, for it is not enough to serve one's friends. One must also serve them in their own manner. This might also be one means the more to assure yourself of her sentiments towards you, for the woman who keeps a will of her own does not love as much as she says. 'Tis not that I suspect your mistress of inconstancy, but she is very young. She has a great fear of her mamma, who, as you know, only seeks to injure you, and perhaps it would be dangerous to stay too long without occupying her with you. Do not, however, render yourself unduly anxious by what I tell you. I have, at bottom, no reason for distrust. It is entirely the solicitude of friendship. I do not write to you at greater length, because I too have certain affairs of my own. I am not as far advanced as you, but I am as fond. That is a consoling thought, and even if I should not succeed for myself, if I succeed in being useful to you, I shall consider that my time has been well employed. Adieu, my friend. At the Château de 26th September 17.
Letter the 90th. The Présidente de Tourvel to the Vicomte de Valmont.
I am greatly desirous, monsieur, that this letter should not cause you any distress, or that, if it must do so, it may be at least softened by that which I experience in writing to you. You must know me well enough by this time to be well assured that it is not my wish to grieve you, but neither would you wish, doubtless, to plunge me into eternal despair. I conjure you, then, in the name of the tender friendship which I have promised you, in the name even of the sentiments, perhaps more vivid, but assuredly not more sincere, which you have for me, let us cease to see one another, depart, and in the meantime let us shun all those private and too perilous interviews in which, forced by some inconceivable power, though I never succeed in saying what I wish to say to you, I pass my time in listening to what I never ought to hear. Only yesterday, when you came to join me in the park, my sole intention was to tell you that what I am writing to you to-day, and yet what did I do, but occupy myself with your love, to which I am bound never to respond. Ah, for pity's sake, remove yourself from me. Do not think that absence will ever alter my sentiments for you. How shall I ever succeed in overcoming them when I have no longer the courage to combat them? You see, I tell you all. I fear less to confess my weakness than to succumb to it. But that control which I have lost over my feelings I shall retain over my actions. Yes, I shall retain it, I am resolved, be it at the cost of my life. Alas, the time is not far distant when I believed myself very sure of never having such struggles to undergo. I congratulated myself, I vaunted myself for this, perhaps overmuch. Heaven has punished, cruelly punished this pride. But full of mercy, at the very moment when it strikes us, it forewarns me again before a fall. And I should be doubly guilty if I continued to fail in prudence, warned as I am already that I have no more strength. You have told me 100 times that you would have none of a happiness purchased by my tears. Ah, let us speak no more of happiness, but leave me to regain some calm. In acceding to my request, what fresh rights do you not acquire over my heart? And from those rights, founded upon virtue, I shall have need to defend myself. What pleasure I shall take in my gratitude! I shall owe you the sweetness of tasting without remorse a delicious sentiment. At present, on the contrary, terrified by my sentiments, by my thoughts, I am equally afraid of occupying myself with either you or myself. The very idea of you alarms me. When I cannot escape from it, I combat it. I do not drive it from me, but I repel it. Is it not better for both of us to put a stop to this state of trouble and anxiety? O you, whose ever-sensitive soul, even in the midst of its errors, has continued the friend of virtue, you will respect my painful situation, you will not reject my prayer. A sweeter but not less tender interest will succeed to these violent agitations. Then, breathing again through your benevolence, I shall cherish existence, and shall say in the joy of my heart, this calm, I owe it to my friend. In causing you to undergo a few deprivations, which I do not impose upon you, but which I beg of you, will you think you are buying the end of my torments at too dear a price? Ah! If, to make you happy, I had but to consent to unhappiness, you may believe me, I would not hesitate for a moment. But to become guilty? No, my friend, no. Rather would I die 1,000 deaths. Already assailed by shame, on the eve of remorse, I dread both others and myself. I blush in the midst of company, and tremble in solitude. I lead only a life of pain. I shall have no peace unless you consent. My most praiseworthy resolutions do not suffice to reassure me. I formed this one yesterday, and yet I have passed the night in tears. Behold your friend, she whom you love, suppliant and confused, begging you for innocence and repose. O God! But for you would she ever have been reduced to so humiliating a request? I reproach you with nothing. I feel too strongly myself how difficult it is to resist an imperious sentiment. A complaint is not a reproach. Do out of generosity what I do from duty, and to all the sentiments which you have inspired in me I will add that of eternal gratitude. Adieu, monsieur. Adieu. At the Château de 27th September, 17 .